It's a pleasure to be here. And I like what Mike said about the lost learning and the panic that we have at the moment, about children's well-being, children's resilience, and all these anxieties that parents, fair enough, have. And also the guilt as well that parents have at this time, because they have to work from home. And they have children that they have either to homeschool or to entertain or to play, and they try to juggle far too many things. So it's nice to try to give positive messages rather than kind of painting and gloom and gloom pictures. So today what I'm going to try to do is to basically talk about where we are now in terms of very young children and their play and learning, especially focusing on technology. I would appreciate if, all the delegates are going to have the slides, access to the slides. However, I'm using data that I cannot have on the public domain. So I would appreciate if no screenshots are be taken by photographs where children or data is presenting. I can direct where this data can be accessed, but it will be unethical for me to share it further, if that's okay with you, before I start. And what I'm planning to do today is basically to actually throw some reflections, because especially after COVID and this year, we have been hearing a lot about the use of technology and how technology is bringing us together, or how we're glued in technology. So what I will do is I will try through my research to present some key findings and basically show you my journey through the use of technology with very young children. I will start with a diagram. The last 2 decades, we have seen an increase in the use of technology. But more, we have seen an increase and a development on technology. So if we go back in the beginning of 2000, it's when we started, children are starting using some technologies, and we saw that play and learning were starting to become multimodal. Children were using technological toys, but at the same time, we're using what we call traditional toys. Moving to the last decade, more and more research was emerging of how this technology has been integrated in children's play, and how it can enhance children's play and playful learning, and give us a better understanding of how children can use it. All of that was prior COVID, obviously. But the concerns were there, and these are some concerns that I try to put them collectively, especially in early childhood. The concerns was, is that real play? There was a divide, and there still is, between the digital and non-digital, the online and offline. There is lots of discussion about technology reduces the complexity of play, and also that it prevents children's creativity, physical engagement, especially physical engagement. We hear a lot about it. We hear, oh, children always glued in front of a screen. We are hearing a lot about children's social development, or children don't communicate anymore, they're in front of a screen, which basically creates a divide between children being active and passive. Active in terms of, is it the child using the technology, or is technology using the child? About dependency on the technology, about the risks, excuse me, about social isolation. And all these have created an anxiety, an anxiety among educators, early childhood educators, among parents, where they don't know Shall we give children technology? Shall we prevent children from technology? Where do we stand on this one? So these are some anxieties, and I'm pretty sure you might be able to list more, but this kind of type of anxieties exist over there. However, research tells us that play has changed in very young children. Children are using technologies, and we're talking about digital play, and some even have moved on, like Mars, Edwards, Fleer, to say that actually it's a blended play anymore. It's very hard to distinguish between the digital and the non-digital play. And I like what Stephen and Plowman in 2014 say, that actually we're talking about hybrid play. And they go even farther to say that we need to start thinking differently and conceptualize or reconceptualize play in 21st century. The problem with play is that it's ambiguous anyway. What we think play is, it might not be the same as a child thinks that play is. So there is so much ambiguity around the concept of play and the construct of play. There are the psychological approaches to play, the sociological approaches, the anthropological approaches, the educational approaches, play used for learning, play used for entertainment, play used for pleasure, play used for enjoyment. So there is a massive discussion what play is to start with, let alone when it comes to what digital plays or hybrid plays or connected plays. So research, especially the last few years, have started looking on these issues. I mean, these divisive discourses, lots of research is calling of to go beyond these divisive discourses and start looking at the quality of that play, no matter what the objects are. It might be digital, the technology, it might not be digital, which leads Fleer to say in her work that actually it's the psychological conditions of children's development where they play. And it doesn't really matter what the object is. Okay, we have moved on and we have technology, but these are ecological conditions that they should matter and they should be in the heart of the discussion rather than the objects that children are using. And now, since COVID, the last year, Mike said it in his introduction, we have been glued in front of computers, in front of screens. We use technology widely. Personally, thank God technology exists because it brings us together. However, the discussion, and I did a blog analysis, and I looked at Twitter as well, especially in early childhood associations. One of the key concerns at the moment is, how do we create meaningful online communities? Because, and I deliberately use the term physical distancing, we are not socially distancing. Look, on a Saturday morning, we came all together to share ideas. We are not socially distancing, we're physically distancing because of the circumstances. And I keep saying to the teachers when I do trainings, stop using the term social. We're still very social people. We still say hello, we still communicate, we still have all our social skills. It's actually physically that we are distancing. And there is a massive difference between these two. So physical distancing means that how do we create meaningful online communities? How do we create meaningful learning communities? What about play? Can play happen in a physical distance world? During the first lockdown, April, May, my next door neighbors had a 3-year-old girl, and she was the only child in the family. And there was a point that I was giggling. She was spending lots of time in the garden. I was giggling that she's going to grow up thinking that all the people are taller than her until she starts seeing other children. And there were occasions as she was lecturing her parents about what lockdown means, what is pandemia, and all these words that they came to our vocabulary. And I was thinking, a 3-year-old talking about pandemic situation. How do we connect, being physically distancing? How do we build and sustain relationships? I was giggling this morning again because it's Valentine's Day and they were having these programs, these little programs about single people. How do they meet other people in COVID period? How do children can find other children to play? The places and spaces that this might take place. The pedagogical continuity between home, children have been at home for very long period, and when they're going to go to the setting or to the school, what is going to be that pedagogical continuity? We try with online, but there are going to be not learning loss, but some gaps. What is the age appropriate technology, the risks, the opportunities? And there is a lot of discussion that the use of technologies is valid, but for what, for whom, when and how? These are questions that they have come to play now. Which platform are we using? I know this slide has a lot on it, but this is one thing that we're using in psychology practice, is used quite heavily, especially for transitions between school and home. And although it is for schools, the main principles apply to any educational setting, including early childhood. And I have highlighted a few things that I would like to say without stepping in too much in Jackie's speech later, that we do not know the child's experience until we ask and listen. Nobody knows the experience. They cannot be generalization. Nobody knows what is going on in my house and how I experience lockdown compared to someone else. One of the key issues, if we want to call it recovery or getting back to normal, as we say, I will say recovery, is about relationships. How do we establish relationships again? How do we stop being afraid of physically being close and hug each other and shake hands again and touch each other? Which is really important for very young children to be hugged and touched. We don't have all the answers. This is very important from educators to parents to know that we don't have all the answers. And it's nice to be open with young children and say, actually, I'm not sure I know that. So we try to find it together. And the other thing I want to say is that something that we tend to forget, and I'm not going to criticize educators from early childhood to any level, but sometimes when we get the children back in the nursery, in the school, I'll stay in the nursery or in an early year setting, we tend to forget the resources that this child or the young person brings. We are so occupied, and I have seen that in schools these days, we're so occupied to make sure that it's a safe environment, that the mental health, the well-being of the children is there, that the teachers are tested, that the staff are tested, that the safety is there to host the children. But we tend to ignore or forget, I wouldn't say ignore as much, forget, consequently ignore the resources that these children might bring. And for me, always actively seeks connection with colleagues, friends, community, families, and children. Going back to the first point, listening to children. If you are interested, this document is really, really interesting. It's fascinating, and it has lots of resources that can help at practical level. But I'm not going to go more on that. One of the resources that children had available, though, during lockdown, and this is undoubtable, was technology. And also since COVID, another concern that came out from the Twitter analysis and the blog analysis was about reestablishing connectivity and relationships, is about the flexibility of coping skills, is about the sense of agency, control, children being active and in control again. because in all that time, we talk about children, we talk for children, but I have hardly seen asking children about what they want. Looking at the resilience of young children, especially, and older, but I'm going to focus on younger children. And we have been searching for appropriate platforms. Is technology an appropriate platform to facilitate some of these issues? Can technology become an appropriate platform? We saw technology being included overnight in adulthood life. We saw technology being included in schools, primary and secondary, to support learning. We haven't seen technology being included as much in early childhood. And this is a question mark. It has been left out. However, data from my findings, from my research, show that actually parents heavily use technology during lockdown. And when we're talking about technologies, what do we mean? It's all the classic, the smartphones, the iPhones, the media, notebooks, sat-nav, handle computers. But more recently and increasingly, we have a new family of technology growing, which is fascinating. It's the Internet of Things, Alexa, Siri, which have led to a new generation of toys, the Internet of Toys. Things like robots. And although artificial intelligence exists, it's now entering the toys of an artificial intelligence. It's quite fascinating when it's entering in the toys, and I'll explain why. Because it helps technologies becoming haptic, more kinesthetic. The user interacts with the technology rather than the technology telling the user what to do. The touchscreen technology was quite static and is quite static. You have the app and that's it. But using that technology now, we are in control. It's more tactile. It's more open-ended. It's blurring the physical and the digital. And it helps us to perform tasks. For example, our spam in our emails, that's part of the artificial intelligence family. It sends emails that we don't want to see straight away, but we can control that, which emails can it send or not. And consequently, the toys that they come out of that technology have pre-programmed functions, and the users can control them. And normally they are anthropomorphized robots or animals. And I'll give you some examples. Here is Alpha Mini, wireless robot, can be controlled by Bluetooth, voice recognition or face recognition, and children can control for different purposes. And I'll give you examples later on. Similar Koji, Kobo the Snail, Lego, and the list goes on and on. I'm not going to go and explain to you how many technological toys there are plenty now. The key issue is that the landscape of children's toys have changed and have changed for good. The positive of the new technology that we have available now is that the child, the user of the technology, is now in control. I can control when Alexa can shut down her mouth. I can control what Alexa can do for me. The same children can control what these toys can do. There is the issue of data there, and I'll come back to that later. And if I don't, please ask questions. The children don't any longer use technology or having technology used them. For example, previously, they were downloading an app and they had to stay within the perimeters and the functionality of the app. Now, the children can program and code the technology. And there is a difference between coding and programming, but I'm not going to go into lots of technical details. So it has opened a new, different world, that new haptic technology. And that echoes something that I read ages ago from Cage 2002, that he said, we can be anywhere in the world. The 21st child can be anywhere in the world, climbing a mountain in Tokyo, being in Brazil, and it's even more true now, especially the last year. If we reflect back to ourselves, we can be anywhere we want in the world. I was in a conference in Australia this week, and last night I was in Ireland via Zoom, but I was there, inverted commas. So it has opened new potentialities for the children, where they can be, what they can learn, and choosing to learn. And instead of being scared or anxious about these potentialities, I think we should try to find ways of how we can embrace it and enhance it, and probably embed it in what we plan to do with our pedagogy, with our curriculum. Why I'm talking about technology? I started examining what technologies are available at home back in 2012-13. Got a research grant to look for European countries. And since then, I moved on from what technologies is available with a national team, and now an international team that involves Australia and Norway. And we are examining how this technology is used or can be used to enhance children's play, or is integrated in children's play and in children's and enhance children's learning. So what I'm going to present now, the key findings collectively from all that work. We are moving now, excuse me, we are moving now more to look at the integration of artificial intelligence, because of the potentialities that type of technology has in terms of toys. Before I move to key findings, some concerns that have been raised about technology, and especially focusing on play. The questions: is this play? Can it be creative? Can it be physical? Can engage children? I'll introduce you to Elliot. Elliot is observing his older brother playing on Playbox, a battlefield game. And he's sitting next to him for quite a long time. And basically, Elliot kind of learns from his brother, engages with his brother. His brother gives him the remote control for a while, then takes it back when Elliot finds it difficult. And after a while, he goes to the kitchen and he says to his mom, "Do you have a cardboard or something?" So he finds the Kerlock box, and he makes it an armor, and he creates his own battle. He runs up and down the stairs, pretending that's a mountain, goes back to the room where his brother is playing, asks his brother for the remote control, does his battle on the play box, comes back, and that goes on for half an hour. His room becomes the battlefield, the staircase has become the mountain. And his mom afterwards, when she recorded the whole episode and gave it to us, because it was part of the methodology, and I don't think I will have time to go through the methodology that we used for the project. So he moves between the digital and the non-digital continuously. And when we were analyzing the data and we sat down with the mother that she has observed for us the whole episode, we said to her, which part you classify as digital and which part you classify as non-digital, being the observer? And said, I can't tell. I really can't tell. So what we have found so far is that children engage in imaginary situations with the pre-programmed functions of the toy, but beyond the pre-programmed functions of the toy. So, for example, Esther plays with the robot, but then she takes the robot as a normal toy and pretends is a baby and feeds the baby with a Lego. You will have time to read all that when you get access to the slides. They projecting pre-programmed functions to other artifacts. And here we have an example of Sam after playing with Vernie, a Lego robot, where actually Sam started creating his own images on a piece of paper and created his own game and start making his own make-believe play using the robot rather than focusing on what the robot had as pre-programmed functions. What was interesting in the data, and that can be seen from that example, is that basically children were making meaning. They were using the Internet of Toys as any other physical toys. The virtual imaginary situations were blurring with non-virtual imaginary situations. And here Emma and Peter, after playing a while, they go and cut elephants and lions, and they use the actual Internet of Toys because they're physical and tactile with their own images to develop their own play, pretend play. And the places and spaces are blurred anymore. They are not glued in a touch screen device. They use this tactile technology, this haptic technology. They transform qualities of the Internet of Toys, and they make them their own symbolic actions. For example, Alan and Kieran, they did use this robot, but then they created their own map, and they start coding the robot in order to follow their own map. And it was trial and error until they managed to make him follow their own map rather than the map that was manufactured by the toy. They created their own rules. I don't have the time to go into more details, but rules are very important in make-believe play. If we look what makes play, although the functions retained, children managed to get that beyond and use the toys. So here we have Gavin. I love this example. We have Gavin that he used that robot, the dragon, but he started creating his own dragons, and he created a whole battlefield. So he draws his own dragons, and he spends time cutting his dragons and puts them next to the robot, and he creates and codes the robot to work around. I wish I could show you the videos. And at the setting, children have been introduced robots targeting maths, science and maths. After exploring the robots, children decided they want to create their own robot city. And their own robot city, they sat down and they decided, this is how we wanted to do it, using papers. In the beginning, in the first photograph, you're seeing they are within the functions of the Internet of Toy. And afterwards, they start using the bricks, the wooden bricks, in order to create their own city. And here is the robot city. And they invited the parents. They wanted to create a film, and they created a film that they played to the parents. And it developed to a whole big project. They could manipulate the robots in their own robot city, and they programmed them what to do. And the amount of learning, the problem solving, the socialization, the negotiation, the creativity, the imagination, the turn taking that was taking place. If you're interested, you can read that in the published papers, but it was kind of a blowminder. How patient they were, the 4-year-olds, waiting for one robot and one iPad. Children as teachers, I saw you Harry earlier, and there are more examples. That's scaffolding, the Vygotskian kind of approach. So what we found in general is that when children are using technology, risk is taking as in any other play, when they try to climb a tree, when they learn to ride a bike. There is adventurous play. And play and learning can be flexible and creative. Children can be responsible, and there was self-regulation. You saw Elliot earlier, he was in front of PlayStation, but then he moved between the physical and non-physical. Children played with the robots, but they didn't stay with the robots. They wanted to create their own city. So they blurred the spaces and they self-regulated themselves. There was a lot of thinking, and there is sensitivity of how we incorporate technologies in children's lives. We thought without losing sight of future needs. For me, at least, and from the findings of my research, our research, because we're a team, is not about dividing technology and non-technology, technological activities and non-technological activities, is about blurring them, and is about working together with children to try to engage and develop a criticality towards technology, a responsible use towards technology. But yet again, don't we do that with everything, especially with young children? Are we allowing young children to go next to the oven, for example? Or do we try to teach them, inverted commas, communicate, negotiate with them what the dangers and harms? Are we going to allow children to put their hand in the oven in order to learn what they're going to burn? We're not. We try to teach them to be responsible. For parents, the same we do as educators. We try to explain the dangers. Are we going to allow children to drown in a fountain to explore the depth of the water? We find other ways. The same way we need to see that using technologies. But that's me, and please use the chat to disagree with me and provoke me. So if we go back and reflect and think about these buts in including technology from a very young age, it's down to each of us reflections and each of us values and beliefs. However, we cannot ignore that children from birth are exposed and are using technology from a very young age. Do we want to hide that children shouldn't use technology, or do we want to embrace? Voices from parents are calling for help. They say they are confused of how technologies can be used. They feel guilty. I'm talking to parents during COVID period that they had to juggle work and children, especially the young ones. They were saying, we don't know, but we do give them technology because we have to deliver work. And with technology, we have to put the TV on, but it doesn't keep them occupied. And they do feel guilty for trying to do their job and at the same time. And they do seek for help, and they say, how can I use that technology? It goes back to my first question: for whom, what, how? And I think we have the duty as academics and as educators to actually, instead of hiding from technology in early childhood and say, early childhood is about play, it's about physicality, it's about creativity, to actually say that technology has potentialities for all these things. Not only our research, but other people's research have shown that it can be creative, it can be physical, it can be embraced, and there is no need for divide, but that's in my view. So when we're talking about new reality, spaces, times, again, we need to think that basically children now don't distinguish between digital and non-digital. I might do, because I did grow up that we didn't have that technology. The first time I saw a walking and talking doll, I was something like 5 or 6, growing up in a village in Greece, and an American family came and their daughter had a walking and talking doll. And I stood there thinking, aliens have invaded my village. And of course, I grew up with technology. I'm still doing lots of catching up. But the reality of the young generation now, if we're looking at early childhood, is that they do grow up in multimodal playscapes. That the digital, the non-digital, the virtual, the non-virtual, the online, the offline is blurred, is blended, is not distinguished. And I had a parent in one of the interviews saying to me, if you have grown up in a world that you have a switch to press for the electricity to come on and the electricity to come off, you don't know another world. Reflecting on that quote and what he said, it's true. You go in a room and you expect that you're going to turn a switch and light will come on. And that's the reality of the children these days. So instead of ignoring that reality, it's better to look at the playscapes. It's better, for me at least, in my kind of work, is to see how we can develop parent-educator partnerships, the resources that children bring in the setting to foster a pedagogy that includes everything rather than divisive pedagogy. And how we can enhance this technology that is available and it has lots of potentialities. And again, I like this quote. It is possible to prepare for the future without knowing what the future will be. And that fear that technology might isolate us, that technology might take any social aspects with us, it has been proven, especially with the COVID year, that it's quite a myth. How many times we have said to people, let's Zoom to meet socially. Physically, no, but socially, how many times have we done that? Originally in 2020, the year that everything was cancelled, conferences were cancelled, meetings were cancelled. We are establishing now in a different platform and we feel connected again. So it's about the quality of the relationships and using this technology to enhance quality of relationships. And the same will apply in early childhood education. It's about helping, supporting, preparing children to be critical consumers rather than passive consumers. When the shops open here in Nottingham, I don't know about your places, but here in Nottingham, when the shops open after the first lockdown, the news were full of images of people queuing in Primark since 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm not criticizing why they were queuing in Primark. It's their entitlement. But did they need Primark the first thing to do? They might did. And I'm not critical. What I'm saying is critical consumers of technology. Can we help, can we support, can we prepare generation to be critical consumers of technology rather than stand and say, oh, technology, oh, we can't. And try to understand through research with evidence, with trial and error as educators as well, what is age-appropriate conditions for children? What age-appropriate technology for children? Osmo, for example, is advertised for children between 3 and 5. To be honest with you, 3 and 5s don't even want to know Osmo. Don't even want to. No, actually, I'm lying to you, sorry. 5 to 7. 5 to 7s don't want to know. They have moved so far beyond Osmo and other technological toys because of the risk, because of the data, because of the panic, because of the moral anxieties around technology. They are advertised for all their ages, but children don't want to know them. And we have testimonies from parents that they bought these toys for their children and they said they didn't play. They gave them to charity, so they gave them to younger children. So we need to work together. And some reflections. Instead of And I know Jackie's going to talk about mental health. Instead of going on without evidence saying, oh, technology is bad for mental health of children, or technology is bad for safeguarding, or technology is bad for physicality or creativity or imagination, to start to rethink the spaces, times, places that children actually spend their time, the resources that children bring, and resources, not only the literal resources, but metaphorical resources, the emotional literacies, the social literacies, the physical literacies, the cognitive literacies that children bring. We don't want to pick up a child like Harry. I picked up Harry from the school and I said to him, what have you learned today? And he goes, nothing, nothing. That was his expression. Do we want to pick up children from school and say to us, nothing, because he has done animation on his own? Or do we want to work with Harry to enjoy school and go out of school and thinking, yes, I got that, and I'm going to go home and extend that. And then I'll go to school and extend it even farther. Do we want an early childhood study setting where children are coming and they go like, yeah, okay, I'll spend a few hours, play with my friends, move on, and go home? Start exploring the pragmatics of children's inquiry, the critical thinking, the make-believe play, and going back to what Mars and Fleer were saying, the quality of that play and the psychological impact of that play, rather than devise that play. And start seeing the potentialities of the digital, the virtual, the physical. We want it during the COVID years, but we need to actually see the multimodal playscapes that we all live, but young children as well. And I'm finishing here, and I hope I'm on time. It is possible to prepare if we are willing to. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. Thank you for that. That was amazing. Thank you. Has anybody got any questions at all? Tracy, do you want to start with your comment that you popped in the chat, please?
Yeah, I only added that. I think that it's an absolutely fantastic, it was really interesting presentation. And I was also thinking that my grandson, who is 10, absolutely adores Alexa, because he's able to actually tell her to remind him to be happy in the morning. But I think that one of the things that perhaps could be addressed as well is that not all children have that accessibility to things. And I think in terms of that digital poverty, I think maybe that's a way forward. So I kind of just added that might be the biggest stumbling block. Not that we're not, there to take that on board, but that not all children have access to that.
Yeah. I agree, the digital divide, and I have written about the digital divide, and we saw the digital divide emerging a lot about during the COVID and the lockdown periods, and the digital divide is not only in terms of we don't need to see it only in terms of the actual divide, the internet of toys or the screen or the computer. We have to see it as a divide in parent skills, because some parents can support children, some others cannot. So it's more complicated than that. And that's why I'm saying one of the implications is that the early childhood education settings, instead of saying we only have physical toys, maybe to start thinking of including other toys as well, technological toys, so that digital devices, that digital device can be bridged. It is an issue, and some of these toys are quite expensive. They don't come cheap. So not all families can have access to them. But it's important that at least the school or the setting is allowing some level of access to these. rather, I mean, you visit early childhood settings and they do have iPads or other tablets, but they're always somewhere in a shelf. They do have some technology, but they're always on the top of a shelf that children cannot use and cannot access. And in deprived areas where children don't have access at home, how that divide can be bridged. So there is a responsibility from early childhood education. And I'm all up for outdoors and physicality and creativity, but I think we can create, we can ignore that is there. The school that I saw you building the robot city and then becoming engineering, it was in one of the most deprived areas. And we only had one robot and one iPad. Don't imagine that we had lots.
Yeah.
And we're talking about 60 children exploring with one robot and one iPad. So it can happen. And the digital divide, it's something that is there. But it can be bridged if early childhood education and take some responsibility as well about that, in my view.
Thank you very, very much for that. We've also got another comment in the chat as well from Kelly. And Kelly she's talking about the access to high quality early childhood settings. And that she feels that she's sorry, I've got my glasses off, that the resources to enable children from homes without access and exactly the same kinds of things that you've just said, but that she's also feels a little bit more relaxed in her own ability to let her children be more creative. So I don't know whether Kelly wanted to add to that or unmute at all. Jackie's also added a comment in the chat as well.
Hi, it's Kelly. Hi.
Hi.
Hello. Yeah, no, I was just, it's that multi-model playscape concept that you highlighted a lot, and I suppose it just awakened my understanding of, as adults, we do have that divide between the technological world and the real world. But for children, like you said, it's more blended, and I suppose it's just trusting in that instinct of children being able to blend more.
Kelly, can I ask you a question without offending or insulting you? Do you think that at the moment we're not in a real world?
That's an interesting one. Yeah, I suppose.
Because I feel I'm in a real world, but I'm using technology.
Yeah,
So
no,
the virtual and the real is subjective, or I don't know. That's why I'm asking the question. I feel I'm in a real world now, but I'm using a mode.
I suppose it's when it comes to play. It's for adults we can kind of blend that a little bit more, like you say. Now you pose the question. I mean, I'm talking to you, I'm engaging with you, and this is my real world right now. But for children, that raises an interesting point.
I mean, the reason I ask is that as adults we do it, and we do it in a way that we don't reflect that we do it. When we are now, we are on real time, we are on real spaces, but on virtual spaces at the same time. And for me, Harris or the Robot City was real, using the virtual, using the technology to facilitate. So that I don't think we should see it with the lenses of distinguish or devising or classifying. Is just blended.
And that's our downfall, isn't it, really? As adults, we like to kind of classify and group things in that way.
When a child takes a stick and the stick becomes a horse, the classic Vygotsky approach, what is real? What is symbolic? The stick becomes a horse. The stick becomes a sword. The stick can become, I don't know, whatever. what is real in children's play and what is fantasy. And I think the same way that we see children picking up a stick and pretending that it's a horse and climbing on the stick and going I don't know where, the children that they explore the solar through the app, they started with the app, and then they created the solar system out there, and then they used material to create their own spaceship, and they had the iPad in the front of the spaceship to show them the journey through the planets, and they were guiding their own spaceship, which was a card box, basically, through that. For these children, that was real. And that's why we have to see it, again, from the lenses of the children. And that's why I put you that original quote from the recovery and renewal prospect, that actually we need to listen to the children, in my view. Does this make sense, Kelly?
Yes, yeah, no, lovely, thank you. And like you say, it's that adult's lens versus the child lens. And I think when it comes to technology, adults like to be able to control that situation. And the classic example of in settings being put on the top shelf, is that adults wanting to control the use of technology, but not letting children be free with that. But thank you, no, really interesting reflections there.
One of the other comments, Joanna, oh, actually, sorry, my comments are just, there you go, I've got them back, says, follows on from what Kelly said about not all adults have grown up with technology. I wonder if it's about us learning from children at the same time. You know, I'm not very good with technology. My children know so much more about it than me, and it's that sort of giving, I suppose, you know, passing some of that to the children, isn't it? And them teaching us as well. Is that what you feel?
Yeah, in one of our papers that he has already published, which is about STEM and engineering, actually the children were the teachers rather than the teachers. And from my personal experience, I learned technology through my nephews. When I first bought my first smart TV, I didn't have a clue, and I was using it as a normal TV until my 9-year-old came. My 9-year-old nephew, Harry, came and he said to me, this is how you use it, bam, bam, bam. But from our project in early childhood, looking the integration of artificial intelligent toys, what we discover is that the children actually scaffolding the teachers, and the roles reverse. And it is down to the teachers' resilience and teachers' identity and self-confidence to what extent they allow children to become their teachers. So it's quite personal. And in research that has been published since 2016, excuse me, it's down to the anxieties, to phobias, because when you are having that role that I am the teacher, I'm the educator, you have that power. Once you start seeing children as being collaborative and that you can learn from children, and actually children can be in control more than you are, then sometimes it's the time that you say, I'm removing technology. And I think that's the key issue with the technology. We have to see it in I mean, I only had 45 minutes, but one of the key issues that prevents the integration of technology in early childhood is the fact that it depends on how flexible and how open the teachers can be, the educators can be. Because if the child takes the stick and makes it as a horse, I'm still in control. But if a child takes the Alpha Mini and programs Alpha Mini to do yoga, I don't have a clue how to do it. Lila's mom said she was impressed, and she asked Lila to teach her how to do, and they do yoga together with Alpha Mini, because obviously they show them new moves. So basically, it's down to adults again, and the willingness. So it's quite complex, the integration. We have control over the stick, Do we have control of alpha mini if we don't understand alpha mini as well as children? But children can be the best teachers.
Great, thank you, Anna. There's a couple of other comments.
But just to say something here, is that what we want when we're talking about children's agency? When we're talking about children as actors, when we're talking about children as participators, is that what we want? Children to be able to teach us. I would feel proud if I was an early years practitioner and I would say my children are teaching me this, because this is the agency. Are we talking about agency in paper? Because they can choose whether they want to play with a stick or with a Lego, or what is real agency? So it's just questions and still lots to be resolved, I suppose, and researched.
That's amazing, thank you. Is it possible, Joanna, if you could have a look through the questions in the chat and answer any of
Okay, if I can, let me just stop sharing.
That's okay. I think most of them we've covered.
I only have access to chat. I don't have access to questions.
Yeah, so in the chat, there's just everybody's popped questions and comments in there. So if it's okay, if you could just have a look through, that would be great. And if we can continue to have discussion by chat.
Yes, I will.
The time. So no, that's great. Thank you so much, Joanna.
Thank you for having me.
No, it's been great. Thank you. Tracy, are we on to a break now? Is that right?
Yep, we are. We're on to a break. If that's okay for everybody, grab a comfort break and a cup of coffee. And if we can be back here for, I'm going to say 11:30, if that's okay with everybody. I was also going to say there will be opportunities if you've got more questions later. What we were going to do was following our guest speaks, we will also have questions for both our keynotes so that you've got opportunity to ask that, but you can always add it in the chat in the meantime. I've added the 2016 document that Anna was talking about, but Joanna, I'm not sure if I've done the right one, so please feel free to add anything else to the chat. But if I now say welcome to Jackie Musgrave and just give her a little bit of background for yourself, if that's okay. So I have this lovely part here that says that you were originally a registered general nurse. And that you first began teaching lots of different subjects to practice nurses before moving into further education and supporting and teaching early years students. You moved to the Open University in 2017, and you also have a very active role in Early Childhood Studies degree network. And you are now the programme lead for education studies at the Open University. And your doctoral and postdoctoral research brings together your interests in early childhood education and child health. And your research now explores the early years practitioners' support of health in the early years, and in particular children's health promotion. So the presentation that we have there now is about supporting children's mental health and well-being in the time of COVID and beyond. And I very much look forward to hearing. But do please tell me, Jackie, if you need any help at all in the meantime. I'm sitting there behind. But over to you. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Tracy. So it's just about 25 to 12. Please hold up a hand and stop me from talking if I go on for too long. Hello, everybody, and thank you to Tracy and Zita and friends and colleagues at the University of Wolverhampton. We have a long history going back. I taught foundation degree students in partnership at college with the University of Wolverhampton, and I'm always thrilled to be asked to join in with anything that you are organising. As well as being a registered general nurse, I also did my training in sick children's nursing at Birmingham Children's Hospital quite a long time ago. And as Tracy said, I used to be a practice nurse, and we moved house and couldn't get a practice nurse job. So it was suggested to me that I get in touch with college and see if they wanted any teaching. So I started off teaching NNEBs, how to bath babies, and then I took on BTEC students, developmental psychology, and so it's gone on, and I still have to pinch myself that I'm now I have this title of Doctor of Education, because it's really quite extraordinary, and I really do give a lot of credit to colleagues at Wolverhampton University for their contribution to what I've done over the years. So thank you again. I was really pleased to hear the comments about being positive and taking a different approach perhaps to the current situation on children. And what I'm going to talk to you about today builds on a blog that I wrote a few months ago for our Early Childhood at the Open University blog. And it was called, "What Can We Do About the Epidemic of Mental Health Conditions in Very Young Children?" Quite a lot actually is what I said. And so today I want to look at what our role is as adults, our role as practitioners in changing the discourse about children's mental health, and picking up on what Johanna said about children's agency. How can we foreground that in order to improve their well-being and in turn improve their mental health? I'm going to start off with looking back at history, look at some of the terms, and thinking about a holistic approach to children's well-being and mental health, and then some thoughts and hopefully discussion about going forward, what we can all do together and with children. I can't see the chat box, so I'm sure that Tracy will be picking up on any questions that I can respond to at the end.
Yeah, I will do, no problem at all.
Thank you. So, mental health, what is it? We tend to conflate well-being with mental health, and mental health with physical health, or sometimes we don't think about the physical and mental health overlap. But first of all, World Health Organization does a lot of work in foregrounding the importance of mental health in very young children. And if you looked up definitions of well-being, there are lots of them. But I like this one because it pulls out the importance of the sense of identity, the ability to manage thoughts, emotions, build social relationships, the aptitude to learn and to acquire an education, and ultimately enabling full active participation in society. So quite often, and you can actually break down well-being in, or look at it from different perspectives, from education, well-being, and so on. And mental health, we all have mental health, and we may have good mental health or poor mental health, but it's not necessarily as binary as that, because as we all know, it can vary. It's like a windscreen wiper, it can go backwards and forwards, and sometimes it can just be in the middle. And the mental health definition there, a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. So this is a definition that spans the lifespan. So of course, for children who rely on adults to create their environment and to help their community to develop, it's particularly important that we are thinking about children's mental health. And another definition to differentiate between mental health and mental illness. A mental illness or a mental health condition is, again, something else. You look at various definitions and you can get several variations on a theme, but this definition is a disorder of the mind which seriously affects a child's functioning as well as their behaviour or thinking over an extended period of time. So we could actually do a lot of discussion about how useful those definitions are, but I offer them to you to reflect upon, and perhaps you may want to come back and discuss them. I have always really enjoyed history, and I really think it's important that to understand any concept that we look back in history. And the reason for doing this is because we tend to think about children having mental health problems as something that's relatively new. But if we look back at the experiences of children in Victorian times, which was, I think she came to the throne about 1830 and died at the beginning of 1900s. But lots of novelists at that time wrote about children's lives. We all know the story, I think, about Charles Dickens, that Charles Dickens wrote about Oliver Twist, an orphan boy. He was sold to work as an apprentice at an undertaker's. And part of his punishment was that he was put in a coffin. And then, of course, he escaped and became a member of a gang of thieves. So if we looked at his life in the context of current times, it's like it's child slave labour. Charles Kingsley wrote about the plight of chimney sweeps in the Water Babies. I'm just going to read you just a little bit from the first page of this book. And those of you who are joining us from Melbourne, I know it's night time, so I hope my reading doesn't send you to sleep. So the first few, I'm missing out a few of the lines, I'm just picking out some of them. Once upon a time, there was a little chimney sweep, and his name was Tom. There were plenty of chimneys to sweep and plenty of money for Tom to earn and his master to spend. He could not read or write, and he never washed himself, for there was no water up the court where he lived. He cried half his time and laughed the other half. He cried when he had to climb the dark flues, rubbing his poor knees and elbows raw, and when the soot got in his eyes, which it did every day in the week. And when his master beat him, which he did every day in the week, and when he did not have enough to eat, which happened every day in the week likewise. And he laughed the other half of the day when he was tossing halfpennies with the other boys, or playing leapfrog over the posts, or bowling stones at the horses' legs as they trotted by, which last was excellent fun, when there was a wall at hand behind which to hide. Now, I think that is so moving. I think to me, it illustrates the misery and the desperation of his life. But on the other hand, his escape was playing. And I think that we probably don't, it was never actually articulated that the emotional trauma that children had when they were being exploited in that way. Another book that's really affected me and helped me in my understanding that children's mental health and well-being is something that's always been of concern, and in particular to these novelists from 160 years ago. It is the first chapter of Jane Eyre. Please look it up and read it. She writes really movingly about the depression and anxiety that Jane Eyre experienced as a consequence of being, again, an orphan, living with relatives who mistreated her. And coming further along in more recent history, those of you who've got elders in your family who were children at the time of the Second World War, which is 39 to 45, may have spoken of their experiences of being an evacuee during the Second World War, where very small children, 3 and 4 years old, were taken away from the big cities like Birmingham and London to places of safety in the countryside. And they would be, like this little girl here, sent off with a label around their neck and taken in by strangers. And a lot of them had very unpleasant and disturbing experiences as evacuees. On the other hand, of course, a lot had great time because they were fed better and, of course, kept safe. But they were away from their families for often the whole duration of the war. The experience of children during the war was really the provocation for UNICEF setting up their approach to helping children, and eventually the rights of the child becoming ratified by most countries in the world. But again, if you think about the timeline, the war ended 1945, and it was 1989 before the rights of the child were declared. So going back to that, really, just to make the point that children have always had mental health problems and mental health issues, but because of their position in society and the acceptance that children could be abused, if you like, and neglected and used, as indeed they are still in many areas of the world. So it's not a new thing. So mental health, I think of it really as part of a whole. If we think about an orange, we can pull the segments apart because mental health isn't something in isolation, it's part of a whole. So we can pull it apart and look at the bits, but you still have that interrelated connection. And I will talk about that in more detail later on. So I've already given the historical, some historical background, because I think the media would lead us to believe that it's a new issue. But Tamsin Ford wrote a report, it was about 3 or 4 years ago, the references at the end, that she questioned that there had been such an increase in the numbers of children with mental health conditions. In 1999, just at the very end of the last century, it was estimated that 11.4% of children below the age of 16 had a diagnosable mental health condition. And this was estimated to have increased to 13.7 18 years later. So that's at 2.3%. And obviously any increase in something that can be as devastating and is as devastating to children and families is not to be dismissed or overlooked. But the explosion that we're led to believe has happened isn't quite perhaps as dramatic. The reasons why some of the reasons why children's mental health has come to the fore is because in the 1990s, children and mental health services were set up. So of course there was a focus and a specialism where children could be referred to for help. And awareness has been raised. So as soon as an awareness is raised, of course, it becomes a focus of discussion and media concern. So this paragraph on the slide isn't there to trivialize or to dismiss that there is a problem, because undoubtedly there is a real problem with children with anxiety, depression, and other mental health conditions. but I think that we do have to, of course, consider the impact of COVID and how this is affecting children. Just a little bit about what makes a positive contribution to children's well-being. And here we have an adaptation of a Bronfenbrenner approach to this. We know that within the child, there are resources that can help developing a sense of determination, the level of intelligence, resilience, perseverance, and their general sort of characteristics and approaches to life. One of the things I frequently say is that it always amazes me how children from the same genetic pool can be so different. And Johanna would obviously be able to talk about nature and nurture much more eloquently and with more authority than I can. But clearly how we respond to the world is a combination of both nature and nurture. And a child's well-being depends very much on the family that they live with, and the and how their needs are met both physically and emotionally. And I put early childhood education and care settings in the wider community space, because we have a really important role to play in hopefully positively contributing to children's well-being, and I'll come on to that in more detail. And I think we also have a responsibility within society that we promote positive attitudes to children. We have child-friendly policies and legislation that support children's welfare, and undoubtedly we've made great strides in the 4 countries of the UK and across the world, but we still have a lot to do. And I think the COVID situation has really shown how children have been neglected up until fairly recent months. Ofsted did a report back in the autumn, and this was looking at some of the damage done is the words that they choose to describe the impact on children. This report was based on, I think, just over 300 participants of practitioners, and the respondents to the report, 19% of them felt that children had fallen behind in their physical development, and their learning and development had been significantly impacted upon. Many of those respondents reported that children who were previously not using dummies or had come out of nappies were now being back in nappies and using dummies. Some children had a loss of muscle strength and reduced stamina. They reported that routines had been disturbed and some children were sleep deprived, and that they appeared to show less confidence in open spaces. And they reported that some children seemed more sedentary.
Please, could I ask, could I have a copy of that?
Yes, of course. I'm hoping I have put the reference at the end, but yes, I'll check at the very end. And yes, of course, it's online.
I'm not sure where to find it, that's all. Thank you.
Yeah. And the impact as is often the case, much more profound on children who have special educational needs and disabilities, who speak English as an additional language, those living in poverty, and those with parents who were harder to reach and perhaps not engaging with the early childhood settings. And an even more recent report in the last month by the 1001 Days movement have spoken about the impact of COVID on babies, and they're talking about what they call the spring lockdown last year. And as we know, COVID isn't affecting children in the same numbers or the same severity. There have been some numbers of children who, of course, have been affected very badly, but very, very small numbers, tiny. But there's much more impact in the indirect, or what they call hidden harms. And the 5 main areas or ways that children or 0 to 2-year-olds have been impacted upon is an increased likelihood of exposure to traumatic experiences, an indirect health risk from time confined indoors and reduced contact with health services. A lot of health visitors have been redeployed to other areas, so the usual developmental checks and appointments that 0 to 2s attend have been either via online resources or not happened at all. And many babies who've been born during the last year have had very little opportunity to be with other babies. And I think we talked briefly this morning about the impact on parents of lockdown, trying to manage their work, homeschooling, and with older people or other people who need care. So babies may well have suffered from lack of attention. And because of the economic situation, an increased likelihood of hunger or material deprivation. Now, I think it's really important just to balance this a little bit and say that obviously for some families, the impact of COVID has been really positive. More time with families all together, and quite often going around the park, you see families cycling together, and I often think of the children for whom school is a really unhappy place. They've probably been thrilled that they haven't had to be in school, and lockdown's been very positive. So that's just a bit of a balance, really, because it's not all bad. But as often the case, it's those vulnerable families and children who have the impact more profoundly. So let's have a think about what we can do to promote good well-being. Now, you will know so much of this, but just really foregrounding some of this. These are some of the factors that we can ensure we're building in to children's lives and also into our own lives. Reducing and adaptively managing stress is important. Ensuring that we are doing enjoyable things and hobbies that increase our well-being and physical activity that we'll come on to. And we've talked about the importance of developing and maintaining positive relationships and some of the challenges going through this period that we're going through, and of course getting sufficient sleep. So they're the general promoting good well-being and ensuring that mental health is as good as it can be. Very simplistic overview. So what can we do in early childhood education and care settings? Again, just flipping back to history, Margaret Macmillan, Rachel Macmillan, Susan Isaacs, the pioneers of nursery education, they knew the importance of caring for children, meeting their needs and giving them the opportunities to do interesting things and listening to children, all really important. And again, particularly for children who didn't have access to all of these resources within their own home. So thinking about the curriculum, New Zealand was probably one of the first countries in the world to recognise that children needed a curriculum or an approach to early education that was going to pay off in the long term in order to promote their well-being. And part of their motivation for being one of the pioneers really in relation to statutory curriculum was that they realised that there was a big divide in society, that the indigenous population tended to be not do as well in terms of educational outcomes, and there was more poverty. So as a way of trying to ensure that there was more equality within society, Tefariki, which translates from the Maori to a woven mat, is the New Zealand vision to help promote children to become competent and confident, helping them to express their thoughts, be articulate, be healthy in mind, body and spirit, secure in their sense of belonging, and in the knowledge that they make a valued contribution to society. And again, it's a little bit further on. England, back in 2007, at the early years foundation stage was introduced, setting the standards for learning, development and care for children from birth to 5, and comparing EYFS with Tefariki, you can see where a lot of the English inspiration came from. And each of the 4 nations of the UK has their own version of an early childhood curriculum, and those colleagues who are on this Zoom conference, I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts about how your curriculum helps to promote well-being and potentially to improve mental health for children. So if you look at the EYFS, I've written a chapter for a book that Joanna's edited, and it's about children's health, mental health and physical health. And I went through the EYFS, and something like 36 parts of the EYFS that link directly to health. And looking at mental health, if you look at some of these overarching principles, you can see the comparison with Tefariki, and also the resources that are needed to promote good well-being and hopefully promote good mental health. This aim of looking at each child and looking at and trying to ensure and support them to be resilient, capable, confident and self-assured. We talk about positive relationships. And of course, the environment is so incredibly important to for children to explore and to be part of. And we have this thread, don't we, of the unique child. Hopefully, this awareness that not all children, of course, are the same, and they need this individual approach. I have become involved with the all-party parliamentary group, A Fit and Healthy Childhood, over the last year or so, and they have produced lots of reports that again are available to anybody via the internet, and they've looked at obesity, physical activity, mental health, and one of the reports from just a few years ago really looks very closely at the link between mental health and physical activity, and also how important it is for children to have what they describe as emotionally stage appropriate mental health and movement interventions in childhood. Now, I think I'd probably question the whole thing about interventions. I think that what we need is to do what we're doing, offer really good outdoor and indoor physical activities to children where they're allowed, not allowed, but they're encouraged to participate and move freely between activities that they really enjoy. However, I do think that one of the recommendations within the report is possibly worthy of further discussion, and is possibly right, that all education professionals, perhaps there is a need to receive training in ways to maximise movement in children strategically, thus enhancing the well-being of children of all dispositions, abilities and need. So I was presenting at an all-party parliamentary group meeting last month, and part of the movement that they want to bring people, professionals and parents together in is looking at how we can improve physical activity in young children. So again, I used a Bronfenbrenner approach, and I have carried out some research with the setting into health promotion and the ways that practitioners in early childhood settings can and do carry out health promotion with children. And this really strikingly important point that emerged from the research was you almost have to do any intervention and with the child, through the child, to reach the family, because you need to make this a whole systems approach. And again, the success of that in the pilot study was very much down to the relationships that those practitioners, the excellent relationships that those practitioners had developed with the families of the children. So again, looking at the place of the EYFS in relation to England, and how high quality early childhood education and care can really help enable and give opportunities to children and families to enhance their physical activity and therefore to enhance their well-being and improve mental health. So this diagram is looking at the family, but really looking at how early childhood settings can cross this barrier. And also it's important that the community is friendly to children and has the resources available, children's centres and safe play areas. And of course, the time of austerity that we've been through, and the lack of political will to promote children's rights by ensuring that we have high quality early education, has meant that these facilities and resources are not as available as they absolutely must be. And again, there's a real need for national policies and guidance and media that embed physical activity and a recognition of how well-being can be enhanced in young children in our national psyche. And actually what I didn't say at the beginning is it's not just a UK problem, this one of children's mental health. It's a global issue, and one that many countries are trying to tackle. At the APPG, again, I was trying to make a political statement that, as we've just discussed in relation to digital poverty, access to physical activities is a social justice issue, because children who live in environments that are not conducive to outdoor play are less likely to be able to have access to the outdoors and to be physically active. Family and carer support, again, parents who are engaged are more likely to be able to get children out and have those resources that can buy the things that make physical activity enjoyable and accessible. Parental mental health is also an issue, and that of course is not just one sector of society, that can go across all sectors of society. I think I've repeated that slide, or I've gone backwards. Oh, I've gone backwards. Right, bear with me. Thank you. So one of the things I called for at the APPG meeting was for policymakers to recognise how practitioners in early childhood settings can make a difference. And
very good speakers who speak from excellent.
So the different range of settings that children can be looked after in, and I made the point about the importance of increasing knowledge and understanding of practitioners in relation to physical activity and development, the importance of working with parents in partnership, and needing this multi-agency approach. We have the integrated review at 2.5, and many of you will know much better than I do some of the challenges that has had in implementing it, but equally there are huge benefits if we can get that right. And one of the recommendations that I made was about training for practitioners, and also that Ofsted could look at physical activity as part of inspection, not in a mechanistic way, but as part of the whole provision, and very much linking and making it clear that physical activity for each individual unique child is vitally important for well-being. And I was also making recommendations for policy. We have the policy in our curriculum, it's statutory, and an Ofsted report from 3 years ago stated that we know that in the early years a crucial part of preparing children for school is developing their muscular strength and dexterity. Now, I'm not an advocate for school readiness as such, but I flex this by saying that the importance of getting it right in the early years for children in childhood, not just as preparation for adults. And I thought that this spoke to the policymakers and also to practitioners. The best nurseries recognise this and encourage children to be busy and active. So just an example of responsibilities that we all have, really. And Johanna talked, of course, great depth, much more depth than we're going to in this point. But again, I would say that being cautious about screen time is really important. I think we all know that the habits that are shaped in the very early months and years of our lives stay with us. So ensuring that we are very aware of how much access and time children have with whatever screen they're using is vitally important. And there's been, I think, quite a lot of discussion about the chief medical officers, chief without the F at the end, sorry, guidance about screen time. But I included this really to convey the sense that this is part of something that each family has to think about within society to just ensure that children aren't too exposed. And I totally take the point that there are huge benefits to children becoming engaged with technology, but again, just being cautious about the potential impact longer term on access to inappropriate content and for longer periods of time. So I'm hoping that you're really reassured that high quality early childhood education can really add a huge amount to increasing children's well-being, and for many children, being in their setting or their school can be a really happy time in their day. Again, the principles and policies, the principles of the EYFS and any of the early childhood curriculum gives the opportunity for play indoor and out. We have a commitment to listening to children. We know that the importance of routines. Think about Maslow and the hierarchy of needs, ensuring that the physical needs are met. Children aren't hungry and they do get enough sleep. Some of the practices that we do in settings, for instance, circle time, gives the children opportunity to talk and to be listened to. And for some children, that may be the only time that they have the opportunity to express themselves and communicate and to be listened to. Well-being will be a thread that's through all policies: safeguarding, health and safety, play, and so on. And I think one of the critical contributions that we can make in practice is how we implement and live the aims of the key person approach. How can we ensure that each child has one special adult or adult who's special to them, that they know they can turn to and feel comforted by in the absence of their carers or parents. So I'm just having a quick look at the time here. How are we doing for time? All right, okay, yeah, I think we're fine. So this is what I'd really like to have a conversation about just in a couple of minutes. What I'd really like you to think about is how much agency do babies and children have in relation to their choices, both in your setting and in their lives generally? How do the routines of your setting enhance or impede children's well-being? One of the things that's really struck me at the moment is, of course, we have to be really mindful of the need for good hand washing routines and ensuring that children very young children who may not be as reliable as we'd want them to be in their hand washing routines are supervised in order to minimize the spread of infection. However, I would say that we should always have been as mindful about hand washing, but I am hearing anecdotal reports about children's toileting being much more regimented than previously because of the concerns about spread of infection. Absolutely right, but I'm just wondering about how this may interfere with their flow of thinking, their activities, their absorption in what they're doing. And I'm not trying to say there are any easy answers to this, which is why I've just thought, think about this through a fresh pair of eyes, as if you're coming into this again. Is there anything that you can do? And in fact, do any of you do anything differently to what I'm describing? Where there are set, and what I'm saying is where there are the anecdotes about very set times of visiting to the toilet because of the need to supervise, but also because of the impact on staffing of having a much more freer approach to toileting and hand washing. And another anecdote that I've been hearing about is children's access to water. In some settings, students are saying that children haven't got that free access, again because of concerns about the sharing of bottles and the risk of cross-infection in that way. But this, if children are then not drinking as much in the setting, there are again stories about children going home, and much more perhaps with school-age children, but getting home, drinking excessively, and children are now becoming bedwetters when they've been perfectly dry for some time. So that may seem like it's a physical health issue, but actually what is the impact on children of losing control, if you like, over their bladders when they have previously had control? How does that make them feel from the self-esteem point of view? How does that impact on well-being? And how does a constant reference, perhaps if it is constant, to hand washing impacting on their understanding of viruses and transmission of infection? I was listening to a consultant who works at St. Thomas's, and she was talking about how she's hearing reports of children expressing germophobia, a fear of germs. So getting this balance between teaching children about the importance of cross-infection and preventing infection versus causing the anxiety and perhaps obsessive compulsive behavior is a really fine balance. Another reflection: how do you listen and respond to babies and children, particularly as they are starting to make this transition back into their setting, and what are their concerns about the experiences that they've had going through this last year? This is a question perhaps that it is very difficult to answer too. We know that, again, that the importance of children having their routines that suit them, meet their physical needs, which then impact on their well-being and mental health, are critically important. But often, or there can be, a real tension between parental wishes and the children's well-being. And again, getting that way forward is something that I don't underestimate, can be very difficult. And so that's something I really want to come back to if we have time, and you've got some thoughts. So what next? I've mentioned about the importance of understanding about physical development and activity and the link with child mental health, and Public Health England and Active Matters were also very concerned about it. So the three of us came together. We got funding from Health Education England, and we produced this course, which is free, funded by Health Education England. And this is something that the link to the course is there. It's online. Obviously, we're an online university. So please consider looking at the course. It's 6 weeks length and aimed to be 18 hours of learning. And one of the things that has evaluated really well with the people who've taken, we had about 8,000 people do the course since it was launched last summer, is this audit of physical, and the audit is for practitioners to consider how their setting supports physical growth, development and activities of babies and young children. And as I said, you can access this. This is actually in week 6. And as I said, it's really, the feedback is that it's been helpful to consider how physical friendly, for want of a better expression, their setting and policies and practice is. The Open University, we have a social justice mission to make learning open. Part of that is making it free. So we have money that's put aside for this purpose. And I started work on this course probably 3 years ago in response to concerns about very young children's mental health and well-being. So again, that is available for you to do, and a lot of the photographs and some of the content of what I've spoken about today are taken from that course. The other thing I'd really like you to consider is there is a call for evidence about children's mental health and well-being, and again that is available to anybody to complete. And I think it's hugely important that individuals, people who are practitioners, put in their thoughts about what we need to do to make children's worlds a better place. And here are the references to what I've been talking about, and I'm very pleased to see that I have remembered to reference the 2 Ofsted reports, and acknowledgements to my colleagues who helped write the 2 courses, and the links there for you. And that's all from me. So do get in touch via that email, but I'm now going to stop sharing and I'm going to hand back to Tracy and Zita.
Jackie, thank you. That was amazing. Thank you so very much for that. I think there's been a lot of comments in the chat about the resources that you've got, so the presentation and the references. So I think that it'll be okay. I think we'd already said that they would be able to have those things at the end. So that's brilliant. I've added a few links as you were talking, including Jane Eyre's chapter 1, so that people have had that. But we have got a few comments that have been made. And if I just pick those up, somebody has agreed wholeheartedly that outside daily activities should be mandatory, and that it's really, really important. We've also got a comment about, it's okay, it's starting at the top, sometimes it's a little difficult. Somebody was saying about that food school vouchers are not reaching families with children under 5 years who are not in school. There are nurseries who are collecting contributions for such families, and I think that that is perhaps something across the board. I know that a lot of nurseries are doing food banks and things like that, so they're being very active. I think that was more of a statement. Just going down. Oh, Kelly has said, I've noticed my child not drinking enough water in the setting as they're concerned over mitigations for safety. So that was an example of what you were talking about a moment ago. And Augusta was saying that she's changed social engagement when eating lunch due to social distancing, such as avoiding children sitting across from each other and teachers wearing masks, and young children missing facial clues and cues. I don't know, Augusta, did you want to add anything to that? Did you want to unmute perhaps? I don't know whether Augusta's there at the moment.
Yeah, I think she is. I just saw her flash on. I think she's on mute. Augusta, you're on mute. Oh, you're off mute.
Sorry, I should be well rehearsed at this. Yeah, just to say that I'm actually in Italy at the moment, and we've been wearing masks, all our teachers, from last March, continually the whole time. We've tried some masks with like little windows in, but they all steam up. And I think in the early years, it's been particularly difficult for the children because they're just not seeing our faces. It's just sets of eyes. And we've had to socially distance tables. From probably reception, it's a little bit on the edge because you don't have to wear a mask in Italy if you're under 6. So all the children above 6 are wearing masks all the way through school. So from last year, so this is nearly a whole year. We've got 2 weeks before we get back to a year anniversary. And I think the social distancing around the dinner table is having quite a big impact because usually the children will be looking at each other and chatting, and they're having to sit socially distanced, facing the front, not facing each other. And these are just points to consider, really.
Very important point. And actually, I know a lot of this is hindsight, and I really don't want to go being critical of decisions taken, because
Mhm.
you only know a mistake has happened when you look back at the consequences of it. And of course, we can't foretell the future. But really what we needed to do was to ensure that, not, well, obviously it doesn't respond to the early part, but teachers and practitioners in education should have been vaccinated as priority, because our children are our priority, to ensure that they have the best care and education that we know they need. And part of that is the social interaction, the communication, and I mean, it's absolutely critical, isn't it? So I couldn't agree more with you, Augusta.
Yes, yes, thank you.
I think as well, Jackie, Joanna was agreeing about how important it was. I've lost that chat again now. In terms of the value we need for our well-being during these times. So that was offering the support there. And going down, you've got some fantastic comments about what a fantastic session this has been. And I think this is for both our keynote speakers, and particularly in terms of ideas and how to support the development of the curriculum and delivering in terms of further education. I'm just about to add into the chat as well, if people are kind of in the position where they may have to be leaving us in a moment, is if you could put some of your thoughts into the chat and some feedback, that would be really, really helpful in terms of how we go forward in developing further opportunities like this. But also, if you've got any questions, if you pop those in the chat, we can always respond to you a little bit later. So again, that would be a fantastic way to kind of keep in touch. I don't know if there's any more questions for Jackie or for perhaps even Joanna at this point. I don't think there's anything in particular in the chat. Teresa said, totally agree, all teachers must be vaccinated ASAP in order to open all schools. I think, yeah, a lot of people are feeling in exactly the same way. Because I think then we could get back to some form of support for children. So I think that that's very, very relevant. But I will stop speaking at this moment in case anybody else would like to chip in or would like to add a little bit more into the chat. Can't see anything there at the moment.
If I could say, Jackie, one of the things that I found as a mum of a 3-year-old has been the impact of leaving him at the door, like at the school gate, you know, because he goes to a school nursery. Started that in September, so it's a new provision for him, and I think that has been a, because before he was in a nursery setting and I would take him in and, you know, and settle him and then leave, and I think that's been I thought obviously it was probably impacted on me more than it's impacted on him, but I think that it's been a really big deal for me having to kind of leave him at the gate and him walking with the practitioners, and the social distancing aspects of that, and everybody walking up with their masks on and sort of and us with our masks on. Yeah, that's been a really significant thing for me and my son, and yeah,
I totally get that. And of course, if adults, whether you're the mother or the carer or, you know, anyone, if we're anxious and not as happy as we can be, then that is going to rub off on them, isn't it? And and I think it goes back to what Joanna's saying, that physical touch is so important. And when you're handing over your precious child, you actually want to do that, don't you, in sort of having that connection, you know, that seamless transition. So I completely get that. Very hard.
One of the questions I actually had for Joanna as well, if it was possible, Joanna, I know that your keynote was on wasn't on this, but in terms of your practice at the moment, is there anything that you could let us know about what you're seeing in practice at present?
You really want to know? There is an increase on mental health issues. That's for sure. There is an increase on abuse as well. In relation to very young children, what I have noticed and colleagues have noticed is that there is resilience and there is hope. Yes, there are a few problems. Yes, children in the beginning, especially after the lockdown, because the first lockdown was slightly different in quantity and quality compared to this one now. In the beginning, when children very young children by the age of 3 or 4 could communicate absolutely fine with other children via Zoom, with the support and facilitation of their parents, and not necessarily via Zoom, other platforms like WhatsApp or whatever. But when they were seeing each other, they were hesitant to go close to each other. And this is the point that I was making. We should stop talking about social distancing. We should just eliminate that word from our vocabulary, please, 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 especially when we work with young children, and especially when we work with children from diverse needs, such like autism or learning difficulties, because that even causes more problems, because this is an area that these children are affected. So one of the things that we saw during COVID is people staying home, and anxieties have increased, and obviously parents feel guilty how they share their time, because although some families have managed, and Jackie really said that very well, we see families together, they do spend more meal times together. There are other families that there were underlying issues before. These underlying issues became more evident now. And there are parents that they feel guilty that they have to share time, and that anxiety comes as shouting to children, and then they feel more guilt, and it's a vicious cycle. And to be honest with you, as parents, because everything starts from parents, one of the things that we try to do and say to parents is like, don't feel guilty, because at the end of the day, they have to put bread on the table, if that makes sense. They have to work. And this is why I put that slide from the renewal reintroduction, that actually it's about talking to children, explaining the situation, saying, I have to work now. But yes, there is an increase. I mean, the incidents have doubled. There is no doubt about that. Statistically, and especially, I know we're talking about early childhood education, but the school leavers, for example, that's more an issue, because before you were trying to make the school leavers go back to school and integrate, and now obviously you can't do that. So things have changed. But the positive message, and I always like to stay on the positive message, is that the younger ones, their resilience. I mean, I was talking to early years practitioners, and I was saying, how was it when you start having all the children back over the summer? And they said within less than an hour or two, they were back, just like that. They were back giggling and laughing and playing, and no real. And children do talk openly about the COVID and the pandemic. And it's one of the things as adults we try to do is to protect children, not to talk about it. But children want to talk, and they will talk to the level they can. So we need to allow them space to talk, not to hide the issue. It's not good. They're living something that probably it's one in a lifetime. Hopefully, no, probably, hopefully. So and this is, I mean, I know there was a heavy going slide that I put, but allow them space to talk, express themselves, not try to protect them. Of course, try to protect them, but not allow them to talk, to express their feelings, their emotions. It's fine. It's fine for children to feel scared. It's fine to have anxieties. But please, 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 if you are working in the settings, please do not use the term social distancing with young children. Please. That's my kind of experience, if that helps.
That's great. Thank you, Anna. Thank you. Is there any other questions, Tracy?
I think Sally has just added, also interested in looking at hidden harm with our youngest children. I think that there is some, sorry, I've got my husband doing his work in the background, kitchen changes, is that Nursery World would like to do an article about children's mental health. And if you've completed the form from the free course, then that would be wonderful. I think there's been a couple of people that have asked about the recordings as well, and the recordings will be sent through to you. But I think, as Joanna was talking about earlier, some of the information is not yet ethically approved, and so what we'll be doing is to be able to share that. We're just going to be able to edit that before we send it, so it will be available. But there is the chat that you've got here, and we will also have my emails in the chat. So if you've got any queries, or you can contact us through that Eventbrite link. So that's no problem at all. I don't think that I think there's a few people now having to leave us and saying thank you very much. So again, if you have got anything that you'd like to feed back to us, that would be fantastic, because that really supports us in thinking about how we go forward with developing more of these opportunities. And thank you very, very much to our keynotes today, because it was absolutely amazing and really, really interesting. So thank you very much. I think we're probably coming up to that time now where we will say, go and enjoy your lunch is probably the one we're going to be doing. But yeah, at the moment, nothing else. Sorry, Zita, you were going to say something.
Oh, no, it's okay. It was just to say, if anybody has sort of comments on what you would like to see us do at another event, that would be amazing too. So if you and comments about what you thought of this conference would be great, and we'll include some of those on our feedback, because we do a little kind of thing on every event that we do on the Education Observatory website. So that would be great if that was possible.
Yeah.
Just before we go, if there is time, I know Jackie has more authority and more experience to speak about any hidden harms. It's very difficult to say from now if there are going to be any hidden harms in terms of mental health issues or physical issues. But if children are given again, they will go back. They have resilience, and we should not forget that the children have resilience. So talking about hidden harms is an assumption, and an alarming assumption. What we need to look is what we have here and now, and try to support, and again, to remember to give space. I don't know, Jackie, what do you think about hidden harms? But I think it's a bit alarming to talk about hidden harms.
I think I totally take your point, Joanna, but I think it's really important to bear in mind how children, very young children, like we were talking about the babies, not having the opportunity to play with other children, and how that they might feel really alarmed when they are suddenly put with other children. But of course, because as adults, we can make that change in our mind. So I think it's being mindful of the potential. And also, I think was it Augusta who was talking about communication? That I think will children have a long-term impact of not being able to look at lips when listening and learning language? I think there's an awful lot that we don't know, but actually what we can do as we recover from all of this is, just as professionals and working with parents, getting those messages across, being patient and just being mindful that this might be the case. So compensating perhaps, because we're working in an unknown area, aren't we? So I think that's the thing I would say. Something much better will come to me in the middle of the night. But being mindful and just being patient with children. We keep hearing this thing about being kind. Yes, of course it's important to be kind, but actually we also have to do what you were saying, and we're all very conscious of doing, thinking of it from the child's perspective. And it's not in stone that these not such good outcomes are going to be a given. They might be, but there's so much we can do. Everywhere I speak recently, when my answer to any question is high quality early childhood care and education, because that is the answer to a huge amount of issues, and the practitioners are doing the most amazing job. And just have confidence, everybody, in doing what you do really well, because that is going to help children and families hugely. Back to you, Tracy. All right.
Yeah, no, I was just looking at, we've got lots of people saying what a wonderful opportunity it is to have these kind of conferences, particularly as it means that they have been able to learn about research that's going on. It's very cutting edge. Lots of people saying they're going to take that back. I do apologise for the noise in the background. And also about the fact that things like research papers without having to pay a fee to learn a lot. And I think that's a really invaluable opportunity. And I think that in terms of technology going forward, I would really like to see this happen more often, because I think we're hitting an amazing audience. I know that there are a few people saying, can we please ensure that they have knowledge of these kind of events? So I think maybe setting a network up might be something, and a way forward. So that's a wonderful thing. But I haven't had any more questions in the chat. I don't know if anybody wanted to add anything else, but I think that we're kind of having a trickle of people leaving us now. You did have your questions, actually. I realised, Jackie, that you had asked people to reflect. I don't know if anybody wanted to add to any of those reflections that Jackie had made. I think there's been some conversation, haven't we, had that conversation?
Yeah.
To add to what you said, Tracy, about being able to know about other conferences, what we did with this one is that I know that the invite went out to everybody who attended the last one, so we'll definitely make sure that we do that for future events, that we make sure that everybody who's been invited to this one and last one will be invited again. So we'll you know, I think it's definitely important that we do that, that we build a community of people who are interested in these events and know about them in advance. So we'll work on that.
And I think your point is really good, Zita, as well, about if there's anything in particular people want to see, it would be lovely to do that, because then we know that we are kind of providing that opportunity for what is current at the moment.
So I think we can close now, if that's okay with everybody. Thank you so much for both keynotes. Thank you very much for being with us today.